Thanks to 1Password for sponsoring a portion of this video. So I got 3 words that are gonna make you feel something. Apple and Google. So 2 companies that have been, let's say politely, gone head to head for years. And sort of while Apple was laying punch upon punch in the smartphone world, it seemed like Google was getting ready to just tap out, but not yet. Google has stood up again, risen with the Pixel 6 Pro, which I think is the most exciting phone that we've seen in a very long time. And now it's up to Apple's iPhone 13 Pro to keep up. I want to put them head to head and see which is worth your hard-earned dollar. And of course, there's no cop-out at the end. I will pick a winner. So let's start at the cameras. Can't talk about either of these phones without starting there. And there's a ton packed into both of these. Before I get there though, it's blind camera test time. There are a few things that come to mind here when looking at the pictures. So take a look at things like the shadows, the highlights, how each is handling HDR, colors and contrast, low light. All of that is noticeably different between these cameras. Usually when you do these comparisons, it's hard to see a difference between the two, especially when we did like the S21 Ultra versus the iPhone. But with the Pixel and the iPhone, they both have very distinct ways of processing images. And once you know what it is, it's pretty easy to pick each one each time. All right, so be honest. Do you know which one is which? A is the Pixel 6 Pro, B is the iPhone 13 Pro. But basically, here's like the cheat sheet, the cliff notes, the breakdown of each of these cameras. So the Pixel 6 Pro has 3 cameras. A main 50 megapixel camera that is binned down to around 12 megapixels. A 4x 48 megapixel telephoto, 12 megapixel ultra wide. So this is a gigantic upgrade from not only the Pixel 5 and earlier, but also the 12 megapixel wide and ultra wide and 3 times telephoto of the iPhone. But if we've learned anything from both Apple and Google, it's their hardware is just barely step 1. If you've seen the way the Pixel takes a photo since, I guess, Pixel 2, well, it kind of does the same thing here with the 6 Pro. The Pixels generally like to lighten the shadows and really lean heavily into HDR processing, so end up getting a tad more stylized photo. So it loves the sharpness slider, and it leans on the cool side for white balance a lot of the time. Basically, this is identifiable as a Pixel photo, and there are a ton of people who love that result, me included. So the iPhone, on the other hand, has leaned more into the contrasty, saturated look over the past few years, kind of more of the way Samsung looks at their photos. So Apple's not afraid to make the darks really dark, the lights really light, and it really pop out the colors when needed. And this is a change from what you typically think from the iPhone, but you can rely on this camera for every single shot. And you know that when you point this camera at something, the result is going to be usable, sometimes even boringly predictable. But that's what the iPhone camera has always been great at. Processing aside, both of these cameras offer some pretty unique features that we have not seen really anywhere else. So the iPhone gives us photographic styles. Do not call them filters, because they are not filters, believe it or not. So it seems like a small feature at first, but it's one that I think might have more consequences for the competition as time goes on. So I've talked about it before in other videos, but it basically lets you change how the iPhone takes a picture. It doesn't just put a layer on top of the photo. So you actually have control over processing without having to edit the photos after the fact. And in theory, you can come really close to matching any other phone out there if that's the look that you like. So you kind of have multiple cameras rolled into one. You also get macro mode on the 13 Pro. Certainly not a new feature, but Apple's implementation is really good. So the Pixel though did not stand still, and they are not gonna be thrown back to the ropes. They took the software features to pretty strong next level stuff. So the motion mode lets you get long exposure shots anywhere, which is something that normally would require tripod and a lot of time. So, and I think the most impressive thing about this phone that really seems like a magic trick, and I think when people ask what my favorite feature on the Pixel 6 Pro is, this is always what I show them, magic eraser function. So and I know we've had it in Photoshop for years, but this is on a phone, and it is bonkers. So essentially, if there's something that you want to remove from a picture, you can just erase it. Something, again, ordinarily you would need Photoshop to do, but now you just do it in the Photos app. It is super cool. It's not perfect, but when it works, it is amazing. So we've covered all those features and have not yet talked about video. So there's still really no doubt that the iPhone has been king of video for a very long time, and the Pixel has struggled. Well, now the delta, the gap between the two, I mean, it's gotten almost non-existent, but there's still some differences if you know where to look. So the Pixel finally's got support for 4K 60, which is awesome. Pretty much what every other flagship phone has had for years, but unfortunately it's only using the main camera. But the rest of the video does look substantially better than before. HDR processing is really solid, and the stabilization is also very good this time around. Then you look at the video from the iPhone, and it's just really hard to beat. Not only do you have Dolby Vision HDR, but you now have ProRes video recording. Even though I don't plan on using that often, when you do use it, when you want it, it's the best video you can get on any phone, as far as I can tell, ever. But as an entire package, each of these camera systems does pack a ton. I don't think you'd be disappointed with either of these at all. So the camera is so important to these phones, it's actually become like the focal point of the entire design for both of them. Everything is centered around it. The iPhone 13 Pro is very much iteration of the 12 form factor from last year. That was a pretty big design change in its own right. So it's not surprising that it didn't change that much here. And even a year and a few months later, I still really like the design. It's almost a mix of utilitarian and elegant, but also it's obviously very recognizable as an iPhone. Pixel, on the other hand, took a giant leap forward, 10 steps to the side, and then like 4 steps forward and backwards for a design language that we've never seen before on a phone. And that's hard to do. We've seen every iteration of a rectangle, but we've never seen this version of a rectangle. The camera bar on the back is prominent. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to really like it, and the more I held it, the more I liked it too. So no matter what phone you decide to get, the first app you should download, and this is legitimately the first app that I download on any phone I use, whether I'm switching phones, no matter what, 1Password. I store my credit cards in there. I store my passwords in there. I use the password auto generation feature to make sure that all my passwords are just like crazy amount of symbols and signs. I don't have to worry about remembering passwords anymore. So kind of everything that you've probably been using and love from 1Password in the browser is now pretty much built into iOS 15 and iPadOS 15. So it's AI-powered fill and brain, including suggestions directly in the page. There's automatic filling across multiple pages, integration with third-party services, and also popover access to your items. Anyway, if you want to check out 1Password, and again, you really should. I know this is sponsored, but it really is one of the apps that I use every single day. We'll put a link to it down below. For me, I like what Google's done. It's something new, it's different. They abandoned the sort of older design language that they've had, which I don't think were that beautiful, and they're trying something new. And different color options, the visor look, the way this phone feels in the hand. I love everything about the new Pixel 6 design. I know it's subjective and not everybody will, but I dig it, and I give Google a ton of credit for trying something new in a field that's really hard to try something new. Ordinarily, I'd be complaining that the iPhone's behind, but both of these phones didn't offer 120 Hertz before this. We were stuck at 90 on the 5, so I'm glad it's here. And as much as I like the refresh rate, both of these screens are a really good viewing experience. The iPhone does have a brighter screen, which is nice outdoors, but you're not really gonna notice it that much. In general, both of these OLED panels are sharp, contrasty, and vibrant. I love a good screen, and both of these phones absolutely deliver on that front. So for the past few years, the processor section of these versions has gotten, it's gotten really repetitive, right? Pixel, though, is packing something completely new. The Google-made Tensor chip. Google decided it was time to sort of get in the game and sort of be in charge of their own processor fate. And this is a huge deal, not just for performance of the Pixel 6, but I think for the future of the product line. So because it's so new, it's worth mentioning the performance here. And this is probably the best way I can sum Tensor up right now. I don't notice it. I've used the A15 and the iPhone, Snapdragon 888, and countless other phones, and the Tensor chip holds its own in every task that I do. I've never found myself waiting for things to load, interfaces fast and snap, even with a high refresh rate. When it comes to performance, from an end user standpoint, it appears as though Google absolutely nailed it. And I can use my phone for all the phony things that I want to use, and Tensor does a really good job at that. And that's all I care about. I don't care about benchmarks, I just want my user experience to be good. Google's voice dictation is nuts. I mean, here's an example of it working. It will put in the punctuation for you, and it does a really good job of doing that. So you can just sort of speak like you would in a conversation, and it'll know where to capitalize, where to put periods and that kind of stuff. You can still, again, say it, but it's awesome. It's something that I found myself using a lot more because it worked so well. So one area that I would like to see Google tackle is battery life. It's kind of been their Achilles heel for a while. The Pixel 6 Pro's got a big beastly battery, over 5,000 milliamp hours, which is monstrous compared to the 13 Pro's 3,098 milliamp hours, and even bigger than the 13 Pro Max, about 4,300. So you would think the Pixel would like wipe the floor at the iPhones battery-wise, but it doesn't. The Pixel 6 Pro is still an all-day phone, which is what matters, but it's still noticeably worse than a lot of other phones I've used, especially the iPhones. And Google's never really been a battery king, and that is very much the case here with the 6th gen Pixel phones. All right, so the rest of these features with these phones, it's gonna read like a typical spec sheet. So the iPhone's got Face ID, and the Pixel has in-screen fingerprint reader. Both work well. Although in this day and age, I think a fingerprint reader on the iPhone would be very nice and very well needed. The Pixel's in-screen fingerprint reader is not so fast though, unfortunately. It's not the quickest that I've seen before. It's optical, it's not ultrasonic, maybe that's the issue. But it also makes me a bit sad, because go back to the Pixel 4 days, especially on the Pro side, and their facial recognition software was so awesome. It worked so well, so they've got it there. It's a bummer that it didn't make its way back to the Pixel 6 line. From a feature standpoint, both of these offer like a really compelling package. I think it's more about which OS you are going to prefer. This is one of the hardest versus decisions I've had to make in a while. It boils down to, I think, one thing in particular, price. Pixel 6 Pro starts at $899 for 128 gigabytes, while the 13 Pro starts at $999 for the same storage. For 100 less, you are getting every bit as good a phone as the iPhone 13 Pro with maybe some slightly less refinements. So you gotta decide, do you want the latest and greatest from Google that packs all the interesting software changes, but is also not quite top of its class in each category? Or do you want the somewhat boring iPhone 13 Pro that's not gonna like knock your socks off at all, but you can rely on every single time? Both of these phones are on a table, and being so close this year, I'm gonna speak with my wallet, and I'm gonna pick up Pixel 6 Pro.